Welcome into the WJHL.com Digital Center here on WJHL Plus. I'm Murray Lee. I'm joined by two of my very good coworkers, Jeff Keeling and Ansley Daniel. And today we're going to be going a little more in depth with some pretty big court proceedings that happened yesterday in regards to an ongoing, soon to not be ongoing much longer, lawsuit between Johnson City and some women claiming to be sexual assault victims. So I was not in the courtroom yesterday. However, these two were. So Jeff, Ansley, thank y'all for joining us here today, and glad to have you guys in and hear some more about this.
Thanks, Murray. Yeah, we were down at the federal court, U.S. District Court in Greenville. Judge Travis McDonough has been the lead judge in the Does versus Johnson City case that was filed initially in June of 2023. And about a year ago, we learned that the city of Johnson City, who's the defendant, was going to settle in that case. And yesterday was supposed to be and was scheduled to be the final hearing to approve that settlement. It was going to be a formality, and it largely was, with one small wrinkle. So the lead attorney for the alleged Sean Williams victims, the Sean Williams survivors, as they're being called, had this to say about what was going on yesterday.
This motion is now pending before the court, and we're very pleased that the court has already indicated his intention to approve the class action settlement.
So, yeah, I guess for those of our viewers who might not have followed this all that closely yet or might have missed a few things, kind of go into, Jeff, what is the settlement and what all does it entail?
Sure. I mean, it's an extremely complex case. It was originally filed in June of 2023, and it was called at that time Jane Does versus City of Johnson City. And it was originally filed on behalf of, I believe, 9 alleged victims of Sean Williams, the suspected serial rapist and convicted child sex offender, who said that their complaints against him, some of which had been filed with the police specifically, had not been addressed properly. This class settlement, which is what was being discussed yesterday, sprung from that and is valued at $4.2 million, but includes some other things with it. So it does not specifically deal with the women who originally filed the suit. It deals with a completely different group of people, and it kind of sprung from some of the discovery that occurred and some things the city did after first being sued separately a year before that, all related to Sean Williams. So you can take what the lawyer had to say about that.
We were able to reach such a settlement for claims brought on behalf of a class of women reporters of sexual violence who reported their sexual assaults to the Johnson City Police Department during the relevant period.
So we're talking about roughly 325 or so women and girls who reported to the Johnson City Police during the time span of 2018 through the end of 2022 that they had been sexually assaulted in some way. And again, the amount that is attached to that is about $4.2 million. That's out of a more than $30 million total settlement. It gets quite complicated. And the tentative final approval is just because Judge McDonough, as they talked about, typically in a class action settlement, you are releasing any other claims that you might have to sue the entity that's settling and giving money. So the judge wanted to just be ironclad sure that there weren't any people out there who might unexpectedly be able to end up suing in some related way to this. And both sides were like, yeah, Judge, we've definitely got that covered. But he was just very, Ansley was there too. Yeah. He was just really almost apologetically like, hey, I'm really want to make sure this is tied up with a bow. And so that was really the only thing. Both sides agreed. They're going to tweak the language a little bit, and then he will put his final stamp of approval on that.
So I know this has all been in relation to some of the ongoing Sean Williams coverage that we've had, but as you explained, with the class action does bring in another group of women. How does this all tie back to Sean Williams in the first place?
Yeah, so I mean, in a way, kind of super hard to explain and break down. But when the original suit was filed, a different suit by Kat Dahl, who was an attorney who worked with the city police department and had urged them to further investigate Williams and had met some of these Williams survivors. After that lawsuit was filed in the summer of 2022, the city of Johnson City solicited an independent audit from a guy named Eric Daigle. And Daigle looked at all the city's sexual assault cases for that period that I was talking about. And you can run this this thing. That's the report that came out in July, I think, of 2023, right after this other suit had been filed, and it audited sex-related crimes. And one of the things that Daigle found that really kind of launched this class action suit was should be about to run, and that was that the police department's response to sexual assault was challenged based on gender-based stereotypes and bias. So with that finding, the lawyers in this case realized, hey, there's maybe an entire class of women and girls whose constitutional rights were arguably violated, their rights to due process, their rights to equal protection. And that became the basis for the class action suit. And so the vast, vast majority of people covered in that class were not the Williams survivors. He's suspected of raping a lot of women, like more than 60, but this was more than 300 people.
Now, so piggybacking off of that, are some of the Sean Williams victims that were there yesterday, or some of the original plaintiffs, are they also members of this class?
So yes, the few, the ones who reported their alleged assaults by Williams would be members of this class. Because I don't know honestly, I don't know whether they're going to get the $7,500 roughly check that all of these other class members will get, but they also, the plaintiffs, whether they were a member of that class because they reported their crimes, because some of them didn't. One reported to the FBI, some of them were like, we've heard that the police aren't touching Sean Williams anyway, and they didn't report at all. But the ones that did, honestly, I don't know whether they're going to get that additional little amount of money, but they all got pretty large sums of money because, again, we had an original $28 million settlement. You subtract 4.2 from that, and you've got $23.8 million that is being spread after attorney fees amongst a much smaller group of women. So, yes, some of them were members of the class, but that's not the primary part of their part in the suit. And Ansley can explain, how this came to be that this class action brought in a new law firm.
Yeah, so there was a boutique, essentially, law firm that was brought in. It's called the EKO Law Firm, and they kind of specialize in these class action suits. And so there was a large group of attorneys in the courtroom yesterday, and they've been going back and forth and truthfully flying across the country from California to work on this case. And they basically added this part in because they realized what was happening because of the Daigle report. So they kind of, used that as their basis to see who else could have been impacted by the practices of the Johnson City Police Department. And they obviously felt they had a strong case to go forward, and they did. Obviously, some of these attorneys, as we learned yesterday, have worked on some pretty large other class action lawsuits, some pretty incredible and noteworthy cases as well. But they, again, saw that they had a basis to go off of, and there was probably a larger group, and as we know now, a group of about 300 or so women that were, taking sexual assault cases to the police department, and they may or may not have been properly investigated at all.
That's right. And, really kudos to the city of Johnson City for doing what it did right after Kat Dahl filed her suit. This was an important service to the citizens of Johnson City, as it turned out, and they tried to keep it from being allowed as discovery or for use in these lawsuits, because clearly, without that Daigle report, the whole class action suit would probably have been a non-starter. Mm-hmm. So the lawyers for the city were arguing, a good deed shouldn't be punished, essentially. And that was all heard. Those filings were made. They had hearings, and in the end, the judge did allow the information from the Daigle report to be utilized in this lawsuit, and it led to a third amended lawsuit that included the class action as well. But again, it all really stems back to the initial, doesn't it, Ansley?
Yeah, and with that, I think yesterday, as you hear from the survivors, they mentioned, obviously, money. When you think of a class action lawsuit, the first thing that comes to mind is money, but every single one of them knew that this was going to create a foundation for change within Johnson City, which is, I think, important for us to continue to bring up throughout this. But, without those Williams survivors, as you mentioned, and their initial lawsuit, this class action lawsuit probably would not have ever happened.
They devoted themselves to the case, and they did so together out of a sense of purpose and common cause for the many women whose lives this case touched and who stand to benefit from the class settlement.
So just getting back to the numbers real quick on this point. So we're talking about the settlement that's over $30 million. But we also, for a lot of the viewers, have probably been hearing 4.2 million thrown out a lot as well. Could you just kind of break down the money as it stands? Where's the rest, or what is the rest of it? And how was that all? Why did it need to be approved, and how did that approval process look like yesterday?
Well, I'm going to start by saying, in some respects, I don't know. but I mean, I know that the class action suit, probably because of the way class actions work, had to required a specific amount of an arduous process that ultimately the judge then had to approve and say everything was arm's length. The class members were treated, got what they deserved. The awards that they're getting are reasonable. So the judge has to kind of approve all these things and say, this isn't just lawyers going out to try to get a payday, probably, but this is something that actually is a legitimate class. The whole thing was followed through on in an appropriate way, and it's and I give my approval, basically. So for whatever reason, and this is where I don't really completely understand, but there was a separate agreement reached between the city and the plaintiff's attorneys for the women who originally filed, those 9 or so women. And that, again, is that much larger amount of, doing math, about $23.8 million. I can say that the lawyers in the class action suit, they asked for a third, so $1.4 million. So, if you want to extrapolate and look at 30%, then we're talking about, about a $9 million, payday for the 5 attorneys involved in this, which is pretty standard. Again, that's going to leave a lot of quite large sums for the women involved. There's one other piece to this, and Ansley will talk about that a little bit later. But that gets us to the $28 million, and we'll return to the survivors. So that was one thing yesterday. One of the attorneys said, victims of Sean Williams. Now, Sean Williams has been convicted of crimes against children, sexual crimes against children, in federal court. He will face more than likely rape charges against women, but he has not yet. And so the judge was very clear in saying, we're allowing this word Sean Williams survivors to be used. And the judge says, let's stick with that. So that's what we're saying too, is Sean Williams survivors. It's very hard not to say victims. Yeah. There's affidavits that clearly say, look, the guy was holding material where it looks like to us like it's showing him raping more than 60 different women in his own apartment and filming it, and they look like they're drugged. But none of that has been tried yet, so they are alleged victims to this day just because of that legal aspect of it. But let's talk about the non-monetary aspect of that class action settlement, because it's very important.
Yeah, we hear the words equitable relief a lot, and we really heard it a lot yesterday in that court hearing. And, even the judge brought up the fact that he thought the public would be interested in this part of the settlement. Obviously, this, again, goes back to that Daigle report. And the EKO attorney, Julie Erickson, mentioned how meaningful this was for the victims, but also just to the people of Johnson City. And that kind of goes back to what Jeff said earlier about Johnson City really kind of stepping up and saying, hey, this is what we're going to do, and here's why, really kind of, taking that monetary part out, but truly trying to make change for the future. And I know that we've got Julie talking about this yesterday in the press conference.
In many instances, a lawsuit ends with vague promises of change that turn out to be empty. But this settlement, which the court today called an incredible resolution, represents a meaningful acknowledgement by Johnson City. It puts real money in people's pockets and ensures real policies to prevent discrimination. Johnson City has also implemented important changes to its practices that will ensure respect is given to women who come forward after suffering sexual abuse. We, as the representatives of those who report the abuse, will have visibility into the implementation of these policies for years. This oversight ensures a level of transparency that could not have been achieved any other way and creates additional and direct accountability to the citizens of Johnson City.
Yeah, and again, the judge mentioned his perception that that audit, as it's called, and we'll get into that, I'll talk about it now, is very important and that the public would be very interested in. And here's how it works. That equitable relief is the opportunity each quarter for 2 years for the plaintiff's attorneys to review 15 different sexual assault files and probably review them through time as they work themselves through the system, and there's either a prosecution or there's not a prosecution. And so the attorneys for the plaintiffs were very they I think fought for that, and I think probably everybody's pretty agreeable that is an excellent standard to set to ensure that what the city has said it's going to do, it is indeed doing. And I think the city has actually set a very high bar for itself in terms of how it handles sexual assault cases. Also, the lone Tennessee attorney in this case, her name's Heather Moore Collins. So when Vanessa Bear Jones first brought the case, I think Heather Moore Collins was kind of her. Well, for one thing, she's a civil rights attorney, but also she was her in to the Tennessee bar at the beginning. But she worked also very hard in this case, and she just really expressed some satisfaction at what all the parties had reached after what was such a hard-fought litigation.
As a native Tennessean, I'm particularly proud of this work that we have done here for our clients and for this community. This is what change looks like. This case is a masterclass in perseverance, but it's also just what Tennesseans do. We come together and we do what we've always done. We show leadership and we set an example. We set a nationwide example here. Some brave citizens spoke up about injustice and its government listened. The government stepped up and they set a good example to right some very serious wrongs.
And as you could see yesterday, just a lot of emotion there after all of that yesterday. And so I know that there's a lot of questions about what comes next. There is a lot that's going to come next down the pipeline. It feels like there's always a lot in this. But when it comes to this particular class action, we found out yesterday that there's going to be another smaller settlement. The attorneys brought that forth to the judge yesterday. We do believe it's likely for a victim of Sean Williams that he's been convicted of abusing. But the class members, they should start getting their checks once everything is approved after that little wrinkle is kind of ironed out. The $7,500 checks in the mail within about 3 months or so. And I know that if there's some unclaimed, that could all change. But right as of right now, it's about $7,500 a person, and that could be coming soon.
And meanwhile, in a prison cell or a jail cell somewhere in Western North Carolina, Sean Williams, who was first arrested, completely different charges over in North Carolina. The folks didn't know anything about any of this stuff in Johnson City, and that was in April of 2023. He's sitting there now, already sentenced to 95 years in federal prison, awaiting another couple of federal trials. But more important than that, I think, to many of the victims and many of the people in this community, after that is completed, after the federal system is done with him, First District Attorney General Steve Phinney is intent on getting a detainer warrant on Sean Williams, getting him brought to Jonesboro, and commencing with charges that have already been placed in those 3 children's cases, which are child rape and child sexual assault. But Phinney has told us that he also intends to file some number of rape charges or one case with multiple rapes allegations against Williams, and that would be to do with adult women who were allegedly sexually assaulted or raped by Sean Williams. So that is probably 2026 is probably going to bring us a lot on the Sean Williams criminal side, potentially even getting to cameras in the courtroom in Jonesboro, and there's also 2 civil cases that are still outstanding. One is from the woman that fell from Sean Williams' window in September 2020. We reported on that. Michaela Evans, who has her own civil suit against the city, and then Kat Dahl, again, that I've mentioned before, the young Special Assistant U.S. Attorney who was quite concerned that there was something that was missing after, in the fall of 2020, when she began to see some of what was in Sean Williams' apartment and hear that there had been some complaints levied against him. I also want to read a statement that Johnson City sent out about yesterday, or sent us yesterday in regards to yesterday's events. It says the City Commission approved this settlement with the hope that it would help the victims begin to heal and to rebuild their lives. The anticipated action by the court brings the victims and our community one step closer to moving beyond litigation. The City Commission is committed to transparency, accountability, and providing the best possible services for victims and our community. It will continue supporting measures that were put in place to ensure that reports of sexual assaults are properly and thoroughly investigated. The City Commission stands behind the Johnson City Police Department and its current leadership. For information on improvements made in the department and other background on this issue, you can visit Johnson City's website and then /transparency or /.
Yeah, and again, like you mentioned, Jeff, all of this goes back to Sean Williams. Every single piece of the puzzle traces back to him. And this kind of started 6 years ago. It's crazy to think that it started, back in 2019, 2020, that area, as we started hearing about it, and those issues were not resolved. They were taking these things to police and things weren't being brought up. And again, these are traumatic experiences that these women had to not only, take to police that they were, and it was not properly investigated, but they're having to continue to relive them out in court and also see the media coverage on all of it. So yesterday, the judge wanted to thank the women for being stubborn. He said, quote, "Thanks for being stubborn and getting to today," as well as the attorneys, because I think a lot of people would have probably given up. They would have maybe wanted to say, forget it. This is a lot. I don't want to rehash all of this. But these women, knew that there was a bigger picture. And I think that we did hear from one of them yesterday who said that the big picture is what kept her going. But we also want you to hear from some of the other survivors as well that decided to speak with us yesterday.
I chose to see it through to completion. What kept me going was the big picture. Sadly, men and women experience sexual assault all over the world. And I'm proud to stand alongside these women and show other survivors that there is no shame in coming forward and seeking justice for yourself. And for those who felt they must stay silent, we stand with you too.
So the last time that we spoke publicly, it was under different circumstances. However, some are still the same. What is different is that many of the victims here have found justice for the atrocities that wreaked havoc on our lives. Something which is still the same is that many women still to this day do not feel safe to report when they have been the victim of sexual violence. There's still so much work to be done here, but I hope that by our pursuit and exposure, that more women will feel empowered to come forward when they have been assaulted.
When I first began this process of seeking justice for the crimes committed against me, I was in a much different condition than what you see today. Fractured, defeated, and terribly wounded, I sought healing and restoration through the pursuit of accountability. A society which does not protect its women and children is a society which is suffering from illness. It brings me great hope and quiet certainty that this is just the beginning of justice.
I hope this can inspire anyone watching to use your voice so it can be amplified too. Over the months and months this case has continued, I have never lost hope. That is due to the people standing next to me today. They have become my family. You have all made me feel safe, seen, and heard.
It is easy to understand why we believed there was no reason to stand up for justice. From the time I was assaulted, I believed I would not be seen or heard or understood. But I was wrong. You are not alone. There are people that will stand by you and believe you. With that, you can stand up for yourself.
Yeah, so before we get to Laura Trent's sister, we do want to bring up her story because I think that it really separates itself from the rest of the group because she is the one person that is not able to stand here. Per her family and a lawsuit, she was out with friends one night several years ago, and she was separated looking for her phone. And Her family says that she was with Sean Williams the night that she died and was drugged. Her family hears a frantic phone call from her. She called her sisters, and she just didn't sound like herself, according to the lawsuit and to them. And again, the last thing that they hear from Laura that night is that she was just frantic. It was a frantic phone call. That's what they all got. And then later on, they get word that she was in a car accident and died in that car accident. Again, they say that Sean Williams was a part of all of this, and they say that he drugged her, and that's what led ultimately to her death. And so this is her sister. Again, her family's been a part of all of this. We've seen her family in the courtroom several times, but her sister, I think, was very powerful in what she had to say yesterday.
When my family and I began this journey more than 4 years ago, we felt very overwhelmed and uncertain. We did not know whether Laura's story would ever be fully considered. But after going through this lawsuit, I know it has been. This case exists because women stepped into a space Laura was denied. That carries responsibility and consequences. It has been a very humbling to witness the magnitude of that resolve. Standing with these women today, I want to be clear. What was brought forward mattered. The decision to come forward has lasting significance, whether it was recognized immediately or not. There is power in what we did because we followed through and refused to let silence be the final word.
I would especially like to thank Kimberly Trent, Vanessa Bear-Jones, and the team of attorneys here. You have truly all been a godsend. Without you being willing to hear our stories, I fear we, the victims of these horrendous events, would have never been given a voice loud enough to be heard over the background noise. Victim blaming, public shaming, the fear of not being believed or helped can lead victims to underreport and keep their assaults to themselves. I will continue to use my voice to speak for those who may not be willing or no longer can. I will do what is in my power to make sure no victim of any form of abuse has to feel alone, and plead with others to do the same.
All right, well, Jeff, Ansley, thank you all both very much for joining us here today to talk about this story and to give a little more insight into it. And it's definitely something that story is not finished with yet, and we will be continuing to cover over here at News Channel 11, WJHL.com. Thank you all for joining us today on WJHL Plus. Have a good rest of your evening.